Okay. We're live on YouTube, we're live on Facebook, we're live on Zoom. I'm going to share this on 2 more platforms and we will be good to go. Guys, it's the summer month. It's a beautiful time to come out to the shul at 7 p.m. on Wednesdays. If you are in Bozeman, you will enjoy it a lot more in person. I'm just saying. Don't be fooled by Zoom. I'm done my commercial message. And
Do you serve coffee and cheesecake?
We serve coffee, cheesecake depending on who comes. For the right people and for the right price, we can do cheesecake.
Okay, we'll talk about it.
No problem. Everything's negotiable. Okay, we're done sharing the platforms and we're going to learn some Torah. Okay, people are still rolling into the class. Beautiful. What an oilum. Beautiful oilum. Okay, let's pick a page. Should we just pick a page randomly? Should we do that? Okay. Bahaloischa. Or Baalotcha. We are the third portion in the book of Numbers, the book of Bamidbar. And we're going to go to the end of the parsha. And we are going to be on page 879, 1 page before the end, where we have an incredible biblical tale about Miriam, Moses' older sister, and her talking about her brother, and because of it being plagued with tsaras, with a biblical divine plague of leprosy of sorts. It wasn't medical leprosy. Just want to make sure that's clear. It was tsaras, but nonetheless, I want to read about the story, and we'll talk about how this story plays out, and it correlates with a different part of Miriam's life. It's a very interesting correlation, but let's start right on 879. For those of you using the live Chumash, that's what we're using. Miriam and Aaron spoke critically about Moses regarding his divorce from the woman of renowned beauty that he had married, for he had married a woman of renowned beauty. So Moshe married Zipporah from Midian. They got divorced, they separated. Moshe was never home because he was working for God. There was no way to stay married. Moshe didn't do anything without God's consultation, but the marriage ended. They had 2 children, Gershom and Eliezer, and now Miriam is talking to, so Moshe had 2 older brothers, 2 older siblings. Moses, he had Aaron, his older brother, and Miriam, his older sister. They got together to discuss the situation with their brother and his wife. They said, has God only spoken to Moshe? Hasn't he spoken to us too? Yet we continue our marriages normally. Why does he think he has to get divorced? He thinks because he talks to God, because he's in a holy endeavor, because he's some super guy. We also talk to God. And we're still married. It's a good point. Right? And not almost. I mean, if you read the story without any biases, it's a story of siblings who care about their sibling. They're not out to get him. They care about him. But then it says, and God heard. And what did God hear? God heard 2 people talking about something that they didn't know all the details about because they were not privy to all the details. And it was the epitome of what Lashon Hara is. It's not your business. It's not like Miriam went to Moshe and said, Moshe, can I talk to you about something? Or Aaron went to Moshe and said, Moshe, can I talk to you about something? They went to each other to talk about the third one. And they did not know all the information. And they also referred to Moshe's wife as the beautiful one, which gave a little, whether they meant it or not, it almost gave it gave us the indication that maybe not everything in this conversation was pure. Maybe they were a little jealous. Who knows? They were holy, but they were human too. So then it says the man, Moses, was extremely humble, more than any person on the face of the earth. And so here suddenly the Torah tells us this incredible compliment about Moshe, that he was a very unique individual, the humblest man to ever walk on earth. And it wasn't that he didn't realize he was a great person. Of course he did. He was chosen by God to give the Torah at Sinai. As I said in Shalom Shabbos, he spoke so to say face to face with God. And yet he was humble because he realized that had God given the same talents to someone else, they probably would have done a lot better. God appeared suddenly to Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam, to all three of them, and said, go out, all three of you, to the tent of meeting, and the three of them went out. So they went to the tent of meeting. God came down in a pillar of a cloud and stood at the entrance of the tent. He called out and said, Aaron and Miriam. And they both went away from Moshe towards the entrance, because now they were all outside the entrance. Then God called Aaron and Miriam specifically to come closer. He said to them privately, so that Moshe would not hear words of praise about himself, please listen to my words. When someone among you experiences prophecy, I, God, will make myself known to him only in a vision, or I will speak to him merely in a dream. But this is not the case with my servant Moshe. Among my entire household, he's the most trusted. So God is telling, Moshe doesn't hear this. Aaron and Miriam are being told by God that you think Moshe is the same as you. He's not. God put them in their place. You guys are holy. You're prophetic. You ain't Moses. B'chol beisi nemanu. Out of my entire house, meaning the entire world, he's my trusted confidant. It was I who told him mouth to separate from his wife. I told him that he needs to get divorced. In a vision of clarity where every word is made known, not in riddles. When I speak to him, he gazes at the image of God from behind, so we're not afraid to speak about my servant. So why were you not afraid to speak about my servant Moshe? How dare you talk about my Moshe? Then God became angry with them and he left. The cloud rose from above the tent, and look, Miriam was afflicted with tsaras as white as snow. Right there and then, when the cloud lifted, she was covered in this leprosy-looking tsaras plague. Then Aaron turned to Miriam and look, she was afflicted with tsaras. Then she saw it first, then he saw it, because she started it. She started the conversation. So Aaron says now to Moshe, please, Master, do not count it as a sin against us, for we sinned out of foolishness. Don't let her remain a tsaras sufferer who's a source of ritual impurity like the dead. When a person's sister who comes out of his mother's womb is afflicted, half his own flesh is consumed. If Miriam's going to suffer, it's going to be the family suffering, and you're part of the family. Moshe cried out and said famous words that we say every Friday before Shabbos by Mincha, Keil na rafan Allah, please God, heal her. Moshe didn't second guess it. Right there and then, because he was a humble person. He didn't say what they would say in America. You got what was coming to you. What is it? Let the roosters come home. What is it? Let them come home to roost. The place, whatever, that's not what he said. He said, my gosh, my sister has tsaras. Please, God, heal her. And he didn't say sleep in the bed you make either. He didn't say any of those aphorisms that America loves to throw around. He was a mensch. He said, Keil na rafan Allah, please God, heal her. God said to Moshe, if her father were to spit her in the face angrily, wouldn't she be humiliated and not show herself for 7 days? Right? Imagine Miriam's father came and spat her in the face. Wouldn't she feel disgusted and she would go hide for 7 days? All the more so now that God has become angry with her, let her be quarantined outside the camp for 7 days, like every person that gets tsaras. Afterwards, she may be brought back. Miriam was quarantined for 7 days, outside the camp for 7 days. And then it says, and this is what I'm going to focus on, this last verse. The people did not travel until Miriam was brought back. Then the people departed from Hatzerot, and they camped in the desert of Paran. So the entire 2.3 or so million Jews waited an entire week for one lady who gossiped about her brother to get healed, to finish her quarantine, and then come back to the community, and then they can travel.
Could she have traveled in the back as they were going?
It's a very, very... Seth asked, could she have traveled behind the Jewish people? No, really, but yeah, basically, could she travel in the back of the bus? It's a very, very good question. and I don't say that flippantly, I very rarely say those words. People ask questions all the time. This is a good one. And I know it's a good one because in the Rebbe's talk that I'm about to share, he addresses that point. So your question is a real Torah question. Before I get to that point, I want to start with Rashi. Rashi says on this last verse that we just read, or second to the last verse, that we waited 7 days while she was in quarantine. Rashi says, and the nation did not travel. This was the honor that God gave her for the 1 hour that she waited for Moshe when he was put into the Nile brook, one of the brooks of the Nile River. As it says in Exodus, she stood at the side, and I mentioned it actually on Shavuos, the whole point of Miriam waiting to see what happens to her brother while he was hiding in a basket due to Pharaoh's decree about baby boys being drowned in the Nile River. But if you learn Rashi, listen again to the words. I want you to listen to Rashi's words because every word is exact. He says, the nation didn't travel. This was an honor that God provided for Miriam for the time that she, set aside to be there for her brother and look after him while he was in the basket on the Nile. What's problematic with that word, with those words of Rashi? So I'll tell you two problems. I'm not as smart as Seth, so I didn't come up with the question myself. I had to see the Rebbe say the question and go, oh, that's a good one. Seth came up with it on his own, unless you secretly learned the Rebbe's teachings this morning. And see, look, I'm accusing you of coming into the shul secretly to learn it. But these are the two questions. Number one, Rashi makes it sound like because we were honoring, right, Miriam, we didn't leave her in the desert. As if we would travel without her and just leave her there. But you know what? Because she's being honored, we're not going to leave her alone in the desert. We're going to wait till she comes back. Is that really? You think the only problem of them leaving her behind in the desert would be that it would be dishonorable? Or there's a much bigger problem of leaving her in the desert, which is that she would be in a literal situation where her life would be on the line. The only way Jews survived in the desert was the clouds of glory, the protection of Hashem, the fire at night, the pillar of fire. So leaving her in the desert and traveling for 7 days while she's there alone with snakes and scorpions and no protection and no group, she's a woman alone. It's not just about her honor. It seems like it's a much bigger issue, which is that doing so would not only be dishonorable, it would also put her life in danger. And Rashi doesn't say that. Rashi just said it would be dishonorable. Second question is, Rashi says that God gave her the honor by making everyone wait. But that's not really, seemingly, that's not really what was going on. The Jewish people gave her the honor by waiting. Right? If you look at the actual verse, it says, in 15, it says, the people did not travel till Miriam came back. The people made that decision, not God. So why are we referring to the honor as God's honor versus the people honoring her?
Was God giving her a break because of what she did with Moses?
Don't ruin the whole class. Very good. You do 2 for 2, Baruch. You're making the rabbi feel like after 18 years of teaching Torah, there's still hope. Look at this.
I have my master and teacher.
Whatever, what do they call it? Whatever CoQ10 you're taking for your brain capacity, whatever vitamins you're pumping, the fish oils, it's working.
Flaxseed.
What a flaxseed. So, very interesting. The thought process that the Rebbe goes through here is very, very, it's not so, sometimes it's a revolutionary idea. Here it's almost like a human understanding of the human condition. The Rebbe says, of course, there was no scenario in which God or the Jewish people would leave Miriam alone in the desert. So what would happen otherwise? She would come along with them, which means what? Why would her coming along be disrespectful? Because she would still have to quarantine for 7 days. So basically what would happen is, let's say they parked in a location for 1 day, she would go outside of the camp and quarantine. Then she travels with them to the next place and she's protected by the clouds of glory. She gets to the next place and then she has to quarantine again because she has 6 more days to do it. And if they happen to be in that place for 6 days, then great. But if not, the third place she'll have to quarantine until she finishes her 7 days of quarantine. And until then, She's traveling with the Jews, but she's plagued with leprosy. The story of her gossiping and getting leprosy is continuing. It's not going away. The story, it's like the media today. They make a story last. The story of Hanukkah wouldn't even be a miracle, in my opinion, today. Because taking a little oil and making it last 8 days is what every television station does these days. They take a little news piece and they drag it out for 2 months. We have to hear about the same fakakta story. So if Miriam would have to do this in a process, schlepping around, and then, we're going to go back to quarantine, another, Miriam, Moses' sister, she's the gossiper. So what it would do, until she got to her full 7 days of quarantine, was that it would be disrespectful and dishonorable to her. So of course, that's why Rashi says that it would have been dishonorable because her life would have never been in danger because they were never planning on leaving her behind. She would have traveled with them. But the dishonorable part, by not waiting the original 7 days for her to finish her quarantine, would be that the process would drag on and she would continue to be in a state of disrespect and dishonor as a result of everyone seeing her again in her state of quarantine and her state of plague. And God did this special thing for Miriam. God did it, holding the Jews back, right? God could have told Moshe, let's go to the next location. But he didn't. God said, let's keep you guys at this location for 7 days because God wanted to ensure that she could that after 7 days, she goes back to her normal state of being part of the Jewish community. She's not excommunicated and dragged out in a state of excommunication and distance from the community any longer than she needs. Sure. Iron. And that's really, when it says that God gave her the honor, right? God said she should be out of the camp for 7 days. That's what God said. Meaning God could have said she needs 7 days of quarantine. He didn't say that. He says she'll go out of the camp for 7 days, meaning she's going to do that right now. That these 7 days are not going to be divided up over a bunch of days. It's all going to be done immediately. So now going back to your question, Baruch's question, Seth's question was, what if she would be outside of the camp the whole time, outside of the clouds of glory, dragged behind? Now what's the answer? She would still be susceptible to all the dangers of the desert because she was not within the camp and not in the protection. She would still have the dishonor. She's schlepping along.
But she'd still be out.
Right, but when she's out and she's still being protected. Right? She's not being left alone in the desert, but going behind the Jewish people as they're traveling out and not having the same level of community.
So when she goes out with the cloud of glory, the fire, whatever, still protecting her, even though she's outside the camp?
I believe so. Correct. She's out of the 3 camps, but she's still with the community. You can still see them, right? When the Kohen comes always to check on them to make sure they still have leprosy. I believe there's a whole discussion about if the Kohen goes out of the clouds, and I believe the conclusion is that they don't, but don't hold that to me. But by doing it in 7 days consistently and not putting her outside of the protections of the Jewish people, right? And not putting her in a situation where we're traveling through harsh conditions in the desert and everyone's like, oh, look at Miriam. When you're at a campsite, right? If you're going camping at Highlight and you're camped on this tree and there's someone camped 50 feet behind you over there, you're all in the same area. She has to do her quarantine. It's one thing. And in 7 days, you're done and you keep going. But the minute you're going to put her in a position where she's less protected than the rest of the Jews, and that therefore for the 7 days of their travel, she's literally being not only outside of the camp, but she's in a state of total excommunication and not even protected in the same way as the rest of the Jews, it's not acceptable.
But not when they're traveling, was the cloud of glory protecting them as they were traveling?
Sure.
So why couldn't she be behind in the protection bubble, but still outside the camp? And still under the umbrella. Still under the umbrella, but outside of the camp.
Alone.
Like here's the camp. Here's the cloud of glory and everything.
But I said before already that it's clear that if she was going to travel, she would have to be included within the camp in order to have the protections. And therefore, So we would say, okay, she was quarantined, she'll come back in, and she'll go back out when we stop, and that whole circus would resume again.
Yeah, but I'm saying that she was.
You're asking why it wasn't done the way you wanted it to be done. That's a great question. Probably because you're not God.
Other than that.
That's a good start. But here's the uniqueness of what Rashi says. Because Rashi says that we honored her by getting it done in one shot. Let's get it done in one shot, and then we'll all travel together. And that is an honorable thing. Oh, so what does that have to do with what she did for her brother? Because Rashi says she waited for her brother. Which brother? Moshe. If you look at the story in Exodus, and I'll just refresh your memory, if you go to the story in Exodus, Moshe was in the basket on this little brook, or this little canal. Batya, Moshe's Pharaoh's daughter, the princess, comes and she sees a Jewish baby. Eventually, she would get to the baby, and eventually she would find a Jewish mother to nurse that baby. Because you remember, Moshe refused to nurse from the non-Jewish, from the Egyptian women. So she would need a Jewish mother. And chance is very high that Batya would end up finding a Jewish woman. And in the Jewish community would end up pointing her to Yocheved, to Moshe's mother, who would end up nursing the baby. So what was Miriam's big accomplishment by sitting at the side of the water? Huh? Yeah, but what was the accomplishment? If Batya, the princess, would end up finding a Jewish mother to nurse the baby anyhow, what was Miriam's big accomplishment?
She was there to watch Batya, when Batya picked her up. She was the one that allowed her to know where the.
So what did that accomplish?
That Moshe could be fed. And,
but I just said already that Moshe would have been fed anyhow.
well, not by his mother.
No, Moshe would have been fed by a Jewish mother. There's no mitzvah to be nursed by your mother. So what Miriam accomplished was that it moved quickly. That baby Moshe didn't suffer for an extra minute waiting to be nursed. The minute Batya picked up that baby and was looking for her mother, Miriam was there because she was staking out the situation. She was there to immediately, so that Moshe shouldn't suffer for an extra hour until they find the... In other words, what Miriam accomplished was, and what she brought to the world, was this idea that even if you can't solve human suffering, but you could minimize human suffering, it is a worthwhile endeavor as well. You may not solve all of humanity's challenges. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't be at the forefront of those that minimize humanity's challenges. And so often we get poo-pooed. Oh, come on, what is that really going to accomplish anyhow? You make the line shorter in the grocery for someone, or you let someone go ahead of you. Is that really going to solve the problem? The fact that Walmart and now half the stores in Bozeman don't have check cashiers? You have to do all these automated stuff. You're not going to solve the big problems. If you're going to take away someone's pain for an extra hour by getting them to the doctor quicker. Miriam was the inventor, the first Jewish mother that we know that not only cared about the well-being of others, but was willing to go out of her way at great expense to minimize someone else's suffering, even for a short period of time. So when she was plagued with tsaras, God wanted to minimize her suffering as well, because in Judaism it's called midah keneged midah. God meets out to us based on how we behave. And so God said, you know what? You're the lady, you're the young woman who stood there for her brother just to minimize his suffering. When you're going to have to go through this suffering experience with the tsaras, with the punishment for the gossip, we're going to minimize your pain. And how we're going to do that? By not dragging it out for too long. We're going to get it over with as quick as possible so your suffering doesn't drag on, your embarrassment, your shame, your uncomfortability, your vulnerability doesn't continue longer than it needs to be done. You still have to pay the price for your behavior, but we're not going to drag it on because you taught us, Miriam, that minimizing someone's suffering is such a valuable thing. And here's where, I said a few weeks ago, I've been saying it, a fair amount recently, the Jewish people are not the only people that can sponsor hospitals. There's a lot of big donors in the world that do and can do that. Right? There's hospitals in Saudi Arabia. They're not sponsored by Jews. Shuls, Judaism, Hebrew schools, adult Jewish education, Jewish publications, that can only be done by Jews. That's what Jews are meant to do. On that note, I really think there's something revolutionary. As I was preparing for class today, I was thinking about there's something revolutionary that the Jewish people do in the realm of tzedakah that almost nobody else does. And what is that? We do everything we have organization after organization after organization that does everything in their power to minimize suffering. Not to rid the world of suffering, but to minimize suffering. We have organizations of Bikur Cholim that doesn't only visit the sick, but that in every major hospital in the United States, in larger cities, if you're a family member, a Jewish family member that's going to the hospital at 2 o'clock in the morning, there's a room with food set up with a refrigerator with all kosher food. So the people visiting their relatives have a room where they can only go. When I landed in New York at 1 o'clock in the morning to go to Lenox Hill Hospital to visit my mother, I had a code on the door. I walked into the Bikur Cholim room. It was stocked as if it was a full restaurant ready for food to minimize the suffering. High Lifeline, children that have special needs. You're not curing their cancer. The doctors are curing the cancer or not. But who's minimizing their pain and bringing them temporary joy? High Lifeline. RCCS, you're having trouble with your insurance company, with your healthcare insurance because of your cancer treatment? They'll help you deal with the insurance companies. Is it taking away your cancer? No, it's minimizing the suffering. Bnei Olam does not invent fertility. God decides fertility. The Bnei Olam does everything in their power to minimize the struggling families that are going through infertility. Chaverim is an organization. What's their job? When a Jewish person, Chaverim is only like in probably the top 12 big Jewish cities, but still, you have a flat tire, your car breaks down, you lose your keys, you're going to go call AAA. Jews in Monsey don't call AAA, they call Chaverim. And in 3 seconds, 4 Orthodox Jews pull over, they come running with their, whatever that thing is that lifts up the car, the jack, they flip the tire, they get you into they can pick your car, they have locksmiths. So is it ending human suffering? No. Is it fixing all car problems? No. But it is putting AAA out of business in every Orthodox community. We don't need them. Hatzalah. So Hatzalah is already more about saving lives, but a kid breaks their leg, right? The kid breaks their leg. Hatzalah gets a call. Kid fell off. Why don't you just call 911? So he said, because in New York, it's going to take 45 minutes for the ambulance to come. So what? It's a broken leg. I'm not talking about you tell me about a heart condition. Okay, it makes sense. You got to save a life. But a broken leg or someone that gets a cut and needs stitches, you have to make an emergency. Why do we have to come running? Wait for the EMS to finish eating the donuts and the coffee, and they'll come and they'll give you your cast. Because we're minimizing suffering. Because in Judaism, it's never about solving all the world's problems. It's not about solving all of human suffering, because that's a cop-out. Because what that tells people is, well, I can't do anything about that anyhow, so I might as well go back to my couch and read my book and watch my show and watch my series and check on the Kardashians and make sure that the Taylor Swift looked at the football player. It's an excuse. But when it's your job to minimize suffering, and you can do it, because no one's asking you to solve human suffering. We're just asking you to help minimize human suffering. Now you have an obligation that you are capable of doing, and it doesn't let you off the hook. And it's such a beautiful, beautiful Jewish value. And, today, some of you know this from the Bozeman community. Some of you that are not in Bozeman don't know this necessarily, but I run a little organization on the side because I don't have enough going on to help Chabad rabbis who need medical consultations from doctors around the world. In the last 24 hours, I dealt with a situation with a woman, a Chabad Rebbetzin, who's struggling with tingling in her leg and they can't figure out what's going on. They don't know if it's neurological, cardiovascular, they have no idea. With a 9-year-old child who has something growing on the eye and they can't figure out if it needs to be removed or not. And they live in a country in Asia where they have and so we were able to hook them up with a proper doctor. Did I solve these people's problems? No. I'm not a doctor. I can't solve them. God didn't make me a messenger of healing. He made me a messenger that in those two cases, I could minimize some of the suffering by hooking them up with the right people that hopefully will guide them sooner than later to figure out what's going on and how you fix it.
Sooner than later is the idea.
Minimizing human suffering is the Torah value of the day. And that every single one of us can do. We all have neighbors. Right? Our neighbor, Robert, I saw the other day, Ned's walking his wife. She looked like she has a lot of struggle, hip replacement. Okay, so it's at least for a good cause, but I saw she was struggling with her walking with a walker. We all have people in our lives, directly or indirectly. You know, when you're in the grocery and you're really not rushing anywhere, which is a very rare commodity for me, I'm always rushing. But there's someone literally behind you that has one watermelon, and you have 2,000 items that you're buying for Shabbos. I said, well, you're not generally rushing. I'm rushing, so it's a novelty when I let the guy with the watermelon go in front of me. But that's the point. Is your $1 to the homeless person going to solve homelessness? Absolutely not. Will it minimize their suffering for today? Absolutely. And there's so many, I can go on and on with the scenarios. But that's what it means to be a Miriam. That's what it means to be a Jew. And Hashem looks at us when we minimize other people's suffering, and he says, you know what? I'm going to minimize your suffering too. He did that for Miriam, and he does it for every person. Mida keneged mida. He meets out exactly what we produce. That when we are there for people to minimize their pain and suffering, Hashem is inclined, no guarantees, but he's inclined to minimize our pain and suffering because we showed up in that way as well. And if we can internalize that, not just with random people, but even with our loved ones, what can I do to minimize, right? Your spouse tells you I have a migraine, or my stomach's off, or I didn't sleep well. You're not going to be able to give them back their sleep. You're not going to heal their migraine. You're not a headache. You're not a neurologist. You're not a headache doctor. You're not a gastro doctor. You're not going to heal their stomach. So therefore, like a good husband, you move on with your day. Comes along the Torah and says, don't. Find out what little things you can do that will minimize the suffering. Maybe it's not going to be what you want. Maybe she doesn't want you to heal the stomach. Maybe she wants you to offer if you'd make dinner for a change. I don't really want to do that, so I'm not going to make myself available for that because I don't want to make dinner. That's fine. You don't have to make dinner. I'm not saying it's obligatory. What I'm saying is don't think you don't have options. You have options of how to minimize the suffering. You may not like those options, but they're there. And that's the goal in life. How can we not only be transformative in the macrocosm, but in the microcosm, what can I do to minimize human suffering? And that each and every one of us is capable of. And if we internalize it, not only will the people we interact with, feel the change, but we will feel a lot better about ourselves as well, because we're able to bring change. So many people like Miriam did, and a little bit absolutely matters big time. And that's it for today, ladies and gentlemen. Go out there and minimize human suffering. Have a wonderful week. Sei gesund. If you're in Bozeman, come rock with us this Shabbos. You want to know why? Because there's a Shabbos about Miriam. So come rock with us for the Shabbos, and we'll see you back here soon. Sei gesund.